basil, as Sarah said. This is considered a sweet basil, a Genovese basil, large lettuce leaf basil. It's a little bit different than your Asian basils. Basil is considered fairly easy to grow except for two things. Japanese beetles love it. I had this growing in pots outside the greenhouse. The Japanese beetles moved in. I actually had to come in, cut it all back, move it inside into a bright window just to get the Japanese beetles off of it, and then let it regrow from there. Also, basil is susceptible to downy mildew. Downy mildew is a disease that we get here in Kentucky. It doesn't overwinter in Kentucky. It's got to have living plants to overwinter on. So it either comes down from Ohio, or it overwinters in some of their greenhouses, or it blows up from the south on the storms that come in with the hurricanes that come in later in the fall. If you've ever grown any of your cucurbit crops, your cucumbers, squashes, melons, they get downy mildew. It's a different type of downy mildew. It's crop specific, but it's the same type of downy mildew thing. What will happen is the plants will look like they've got a little bit of dirt on them. If you look on the underside of the leaves, they'll have a little purple fuzz when the humidity is high, and that's how you know you've got downy mildew. That's why I would recommend just growing this from the seed, because sometimes the transplants come in and they have the downy mildew on them, particularly if they're growing in the greenhouses down south. Ship them up. Just buy the seed, plant it. It's real easy to grow. Start it early. When the plant gets big, just cut it back to a portion just above where the leaves are coming out, because there are little buds there. If you cut it back there, then these other branches will start shooting up from there. So you can get multiple harvests off of one basil. As you can see, lots of roots. I wouldn't bother at this time of year to put this out in the garden. It is very frost sensitive. We haven't had much of a summer to speak of. This isn't going to last much longer anyways, because downy mildew will be coming in. Occasionally you will see this plant, it'll start to get what looks like a little flower stalk on top of it. Just pinch it back, pinch it off, and it'll regrow. But very easy plant to grow. As I said, the Hindus revere it. The Egyptians have been growing it for over 4,000 years. It was often included in their embalming mixtures and things. Try all the different varieties. Sage, this is a perennial plant. A perennial is a plant that will live year after year. This is one of those that put it out in a good place in your garden. It'll live for about 3 to 5 years before you really need to replant. I mean, sometimes it'll last longer than that, but usually after about 3 to 5 years, it starts to get really woody, and then it just doesn't do real well. So you can either cut it right back and hope that it will resprout. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't, or just replant it after that. Sage is one of those things. I have plenty of plants back there if you want to take more than one or two, help yourself. But it's one of those that, like Sarah said, there's only a few things that you can do. You think of using it in your stuffing and things in the fall. So other than that, you can make a sage tea that supposedly helps with sore throats. I'm not a naturopath or anything. I don't encourage, you know, if you're one of those people that likes to use natural remedies for treating ailments and things, there's certainly information out there about that, but I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not going to encourage you or discourage you from doing that. This is one that you can buy the seed, but the truth is if you buy the seed, you're going to have a whole lot of sage plants. So unless you give them to your friends or neighbors, this is one that you can just go to the garden center, buy one plant or two plants and put it out as a transplant, and you're probably going to have enough sage to last you a long time. It can be a little bit fussy on its soils. It does like a well-drained soil. And what's interesting about this plant is it's one of the first plants that the settlers would put out when they settled somewhere, or a new couple would always be encouraged to plant sage, because the folklore is that if a newly married couple put out sage and it grew well, it meant that the woman would be head of the household. So, you know, it's a very nice plant, but these are definitely ready to go out into the garden if you got got a nice well-drained site. That should last you about 3 to 5 years or so. Chives, I like chives. These are the onion chives. I found the garlic chives a little bit tougher to grow. These are something that I would probably just grow them in a pot myself instead of planting them out in the garden. Your onion crops, your bulb onions, your storage onions, your green onions, your chives, garlic itself, they're not very competitive with weeds. So unless you have an area where you can keep the weeds out of them, it's a little bit tough to grow these just because they're not competitive with your weeds, and the weeds will move in and take over. But these have been repotted a couple times. They certainly could go out into your garden if you wanted to. They are a perennial, and the way that you can increase these in your garden is you would just take this clump and divide it in half, and then it will increase and spread over time. So you can certainly do that. It also produces one of the ways you can tell the difference between garlic chives and onion chives. Onion chives, of course, taste like onions, and garlic chives taste like garlic. But onion chives have a purple flower, garlic chives have a white flower. They will set seed. The flowers are edible if you don't want it to set seed, so when it blooms, you can cut the flower off and use the bloom. Or if you do let it go to seed, it will set seed and drop a bunch of seed and increase that way as well. So you can buy chive seeds. A little bit difficult to transplant, but if you just want to buy them and sow them in the garden or sow them in a pot, they'll do very well. As I said, garlic chives are a little bit more touchy to grow out, found in the onion chives. Also, when you harvest these, don't come along and just give them a little haircut up here, because what happens is then the leaf is more susceptible to infection and dies back. So what you want to do is you want to just take a couple of these and cut them all the way back to within an inch or two of the soil, and that way it prevents them from getting all these little work tips on them and things. Chives do have a delicate flavor, and they would go into your cooking late because they don't hold up real well to cooking things. Spearmint, great plant. These look kind of rough in the pots back there because, honestly, most of our herbs really are weeds. I mean, they grow very well, which is one reason why people like them. They were easy to put into cultivation. Weeds are plants that are tolerant of difficult conditions. And this is one that's still particularly aggressive. Spearmint is incredibly aggressive. So if you do take this and pot it out somewhere, I would encourage you to get an old coffee can and knock the bottom out of it to keep it from spreading. Even so, it will shoot up runners that will try and grow over the lid of your pot. This would be one that if you don't have a good way to contain it, just put it in a big pot and put it in a sunny window. You know, when it starts to get kind of shabby looking like those back there, the ones back there have been harvested multiple times as well, and that's why they're starting to get tough and woody right now. But just take some of the younger, tender shoots, and you can pinch those off and stick them in some potting soil or in a glass of water, and they'll root really well without much difficulty. Or you can take your big butcher knife and just cut through this in half, and it'll start sending out fresh new roots and runners and things. This is one that once you get it growing, it should last you the rest of your life, just with some more divisions and cuttings. I do have a few pots of peppermint if you would like to grow some peppermint as well. This is a little bit more difficult to grow than spearmint. The botany of peppermint isn't entirely clear. The botanists all somewhat agree that it's a natural hybrid of Menthus micata and Mentha aquatica. Menthus micata is the spearmint, Mentha aquatica is water mint, and they believe that peppermint arose from a natural hybrid of those two plants in England. And I found it a little bit more touchy to grow than spearmint. Normally you think of hybrids as being more vigorous, better growing. Your two mints here, peppermint, spearmint, will do much better. You know, if you've got a wet spot, they'll do great in a wet spot. they don't like to dry out real well. Other plants like our oregano, our sage, and our thyme, they really need to be in drier sites, particularly the thyme and the oregano. These are native to the Mediterranean regions, dry areas. If they do get wet, they'll start to turn yellow, and you get some of the leaves falling off on the base and things. You'll get some disease in that. Myself, I would probably just leave the thyme in a pot. I mean, it is getting a little bit root bound. You can put it in a bigger pot. It's just one of those, it will do well if you have a nice dry area, but given our year this year, it's probably not a dry area, and it will do well in a pot. This is one that you can just kind of come along and prune it back, you know, cut off some of these shoots and things. This is one, these two particularly are also ones that I would buy as transplants, just because the seeds are incredibly tiny. I mean, you can buy a little packet of seeds if you're familiar with carrot seeds. These are smaller than carrot seeds. They're kind of like sowing dust. And so if you do spread them out and things, you're going to end up with a whole bunch of tiny little plants that you're going to have to separate out and spread out and transplant, which is what we did. But, you know, we can do that because, you know, to end up with 30 or 40 oregano plants isn't a big deal for me, but most people don't want 30 or 40 oregano or thyme plants. So these are two that I would do from transplants. These, just from cuttings, though, once you've got these, you'll never need to buy any more of those in your life again because they'll outlive all of us. Chives, multiple ways you can do that. This is lemongrass. This is the first year I've ever tried to grow lemongrass. It's not doing very well. I just happened to see some seed for this at the, I forget if it was at True Value or if it was Walmart. I said, well, I like it. You know, it's used a lot in Asian cooking, and it does have a very lemony flavor and things. It's been struggling. I think it's been a little bit cool and wet for it. I need to do some more reading up on the best way to grow that one. Dill is a very easy plant to grow. Most of our herbs don't require much fertilization at all because, as I said, they're weeds. They're good at extracting nutrients from poor soils. Basil is one that you will feed a little bit more heavily, particularly if you're going to come in and harvest it. After you clip it back, give it a little shot of fertilizer, and it will grow much better. Dill is very tolerant of poor soils. You know, you don't want to put it in the worst soil possible, but it is tolerant of poor soil. I always encourage people to get their soil tested at the county extension office. Occasionally they'll offer free soil testing in coordination with their farm and home night or something like that. So get your soil tested and just see what it is. If you want to put up a raised bed, you could certainly put up a raised bed and just grow your herbs in that. You know, you could have your ones that like the drier soils in one raised bed. You could have the ones that like wetter soils in another raised bed. You could have one for your annual plants in another bed. So you could do that in a lot of different ways. Oregano, just kind of one of those interesting things. I found a couple of interesting things about that. This is a plant that they believe that if you take the essential oils from oregano and mix it with olive oil, it will cure male pattern baldness. I don't think it works, but it's a nice theory anyways. Thyme, this one here, supposedly if you have thyme, this is where you're going to find your garden fairies will be out in your thyme patch. You know, that's what they say. Basil, I've talked about that as being sacred to the Hindus. Fennel actually is used as an appetite suppressant. I thought that was kind of interesting. When they used to have fasting days during Lent and things, if people would fast, they would chew on fennel because it works as an appetite suppressant. This is a plant that I like a lot. In this form, the little seeds on top right here, pass those around there, that's coriander, which is included in curry and things like that. But this plant also has another name that you know it as is cilantro. The green leaves in that are cilantro, the seeds are coriander. And the scientific name for coriander is Coriandrum sativum. Sativum refers to a cultivated plant, and coriander, if you follow the etymology of the name backwards, it refers to buggy or bug-like. So the scientific name for cilantro or coriander, Coriander sativum, roughly translates as the buggy-smelling cultivated plant. I like it. Some people don't really like the taste of cilantro. They feel that it tastes like soap, and they've actually done some studies in genetic analysis. The people that say that it tastes like soap have a certain form of a certain gene, so that to them it tastes like soap. Yeah. Yep, and
Do you like it?
yep, that's just a genetic thing. Yep. So, parsley. Parsley is one of those plants. Personally, I would never grow it unless I bought a transplant, just because it's so difficult to get it to germinate. The old saying was that the seed needed to go to the devil and back 9 times before it would germinate. And it is. It's just an incredibly slow plant to germinate. As I was telling Sarah earlier today, we bought one of those, jars of dried parsley 2, 3, 4 years ago, and we still haven't used through it yet. We just don't use that much parsley. I mean, it's nice, and if I'm out and it's on my plate, I might eat it, but it's just one of those things that I always say, well, yeah, we should grow parsley, we should use parsley, but we just don't do it. So that's one I would buy it as a transplant. Again, most of these are fairly easy to grow, as is included on that list there. Most of them don't really have too many particular disease problems. Occasionally you'll get aphids on your chives. Sage on a wet site, or if it's damp, occasionally the leaves will start to turn yellow, and you'll see little sort of rust-colored spots on there. And what it is, because it is a mint, it's actually a disease called mint rust. And sage is somewhat susceptible to that in a wet site. Oregano, as I said, on a wet site will start to die back. None of these things like to go completely dry. Some of them will bounce back better than others. You almost can't kill mint. Lemongrass, as I said, I'm still trying to learn the best way to grow that. But cilantro, actually, we think of most of our herbs as growing best in warm weather, but this is actually one that does better in cool weather. So you can either plant it in the spring, or actually what we'll do now is we'll go out and we'll seed it early August so that it matures during the cool season of the fall. We'll cut it back to about this high above the ground, leave it in the ground, let it overwinter, and usually it will actually regrow. I mean, about 80% of all the plants that I've ever put out have come back in the spring, so I get a second harvest off of them, even with the winter that we've had. It doesn't like heat, though. If you try and grow it in the summertime when it's hot, it just doesn't do well at all. It'll go to flower real quick, which it is nice for attracting in butterflies and things. Many of these plants will actually produce attractive flowers on them, so it's good. They'll attract in beneficial insects. If you do have any questions or that, feel free to get a hold of me. You know where to find me. There's a lot that can be done with herbs. I knew somebody up in Ohio. There's a city of Chillicothe. They have a city park, and they actually put their thyme. They put different varieties of thyme in a circle and put a sundial peg in the middle of that, and they called it their garden of thyme. And you can use the sundial to tell what time it is on their clock of the different varieties of thyme. So depending upon how elaborate and fancy you want to get, you can do a lot of different things with these plants and things. In terms of the basil, the Asian basil, or there's a variety called holy basil that are, they tend to have fuzzier leaves on them. Yep. And they tend to be more resistant to the downy mildew than your Genovese basil or your large lettuce leaf basil. Any questions on growing any herbs?
Sean, I've never been able to grow cilantro, and with other plants like my basil, are we supposed to like pinch the bloom off?
Well, if you don't pinch the bloom off, you get coriander.
Okay.
But
Like with basil, when my basil starts blooming, if the basil starts blooming, should you chop it?
basil, yeah, you should pinch the bloom out. Otherwise, it'll go to seed and it's just basically done because it's an annual plant. It has that seed to bloom to seed life cycle 1 year. But this, because it's a cool season plant, probably, as I said, the best time to plant that is into early August. You know, most of these you'll think of herbs as warm season garden plants in the summer, but cilantro is one that just doesn't like to heat well at all. It'll go to bloom real quick.
I've tried to grow it 3 or 4 times and never been successful.
Yep. Well, I'm sure we'll have some transplants and things.
So should you top all of the herbs?
No, really, about the only one of any of these that I would top would be the basil.
Does that help it bush out more? Or?
Well, what it does is it keeps it from blooming. I wouldn't top it out until it got as big enough. But then what I did is I cut it back low and then let the side shoots grow up. And then you can cut those back and let those grow up. Just because it stimulate further growth and things. If you just pinch out the very top, you're going to have a very tall plant that's then going to send up shoots from the top of the plant. So this is when you're better off cutting it back near the base and things. But most of these, no, you don't want to top them off, especially like the chives. If you cut it at the top, the leaves are all going to start to die back from the tip and it just lets you go ratty. So you actually harvest it from the base of the plant, just cut off the whole leaf and do it that way. Yeah, no, other than basil, and this one is cut it way back. Your mints and that, you can cut those way back. It'll take over. Both on price and peppermint as well. I've got one pot here. I'll grab another pot and go over to the greenhouse and that you can take with you as well. But as I said, we've got chives, we've got basil, we've got sage, we've got Greek oregano, we've got spearmint, we've got thyme, and I'll grab another peppermint. So there's 7 different herbs that you can take with you. You know, we've got plenty back there, so if you want to take a couple of pots, feel free. You know, that's less stuff that I have to take care of that way. But help yourself. And in terms of any of these, I would really recommend, these definitely need to get repotted. This should go in the ground sooner rather than later. These I would probably just grow them in a pot myself. This isn't going to last much longer. And this you can either leave it in the pot or put it out in a nice, well-drained, sunny location in your garden. Yeah. Yep. Yep.
And I had a rosemary bush. I kid you not, that thing was this huge.
Really?
It lived all week. I had fresh rosemary. If you matter, the snow was fine.
Wow.
Fresh rosemary.
Nice.
See, I like
Yeah,
rosemary.
And I had cleaned out my bed, and I thought, well, I'll just take it. And when I dug it up, then it was died. But it was huge. I mean, it was.
That's great.
It was right up against the house on the side. Like I said,
It's a
snow.
perfect location.
Yeah, but we had. I mean, even in the snow, I always had fresh.
Just warm enough to keep it alive.
Yeah, because this is one of those Mediterranean type plants as well, and I really like it. You can buy rosemary usually around Christmas time. They'll sell it at the various stores as like a little Christmas tree mat for use in the garden and home, and you know, grow it in your windowsill. I really like it, but it can be fussy to try and grow it inside, and I've never tried to grow it outside, but it's one of my favorite herbs.
It's a strange place because it's really, nobody can believe it when they saw it.
Yeah.
They couldn't believe it because it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Of course, it got real blue, but
Yeah.
you know, we put it down and
Did you use it?
yeah, we use ours a lot. We do a white sauce, you know, like, and just like the white sauce with chicken and put the rosemary in it and roast the egg and then we put rosemary sauce. That's what we do a lot.
I like the pork.
plants have covered it all, you know, in terms of transplanting things, you know, got on the list what does well from transplants or seeds. I do know somebody who encourages people to start their dill early and transplant it, but I've never found that it transplants well at all. And it's so easy to grow from seed that it's easier just to put out as a seed in the garden myself. But occasionally you'll hear, I didn't know if it was a Kentucky trend or what, but I'd never heard of transplanting dill before. But I do know somebody here who says, oh, we always transplant our dill. So,
How about dry and weird stuff? Can you dry it with salt? I found that to work good, but I didn't know if that did.
Yeah, that's a good way to keep the insects and dust and dirt and stuff on them.
yeah, we actually have one of those food dehydrators that we use for dehydrating ours on and things. It works great.
I'm going to show them this. This is wild mint. If y'all see it growing, I picked this out of our farm. It's a, it's like looks like the seeds have been done. I mean, the leaves have been dusted with like 7 or something. So if you ever see it, I don't know what. Sean wasn't sure what kind of mint it is, but it's got the square stem, and I thought it was spearmint, but it smells minty, and you may see it out along the banks. It just grows wild in Kentucky. You can see that top leaf looks like it's been spread.
You can always tell a mint plant because all mints have square stems.
Our mint experiments, we're kind of talking about them like they were interchangeable.
No, they're actually different. This is Mentha spicata, the spearmint, and this is the peppermint. Forget what exactly the scientific name is. It's Mentha something, but this is the one that they think is a hybrid of spearmint and then water mint, Mentha aquatica. But this actually has more menthol in it than the spearmint. A little bit stronger taste. There's actually commercial mint production in northern Indiana. I was contacted by one of our county agents here in Kentucky that people are always looking for diversified farm enterprises, something new. They were thinking about trying to grow mint on some of these reclaimed mine sites. They're nice and flat and easy to grow. But the problem is most of those reclaimed mine sites are very dry. So, and this is something that requires at least an inch of water a week in order to grow well. So, a nice idea, but just not going to work. That, and also, if you do grow it, and if you harvested it, the nearest distillation plant is up in Indiana, so you'd be trucking an awful lot of water to Indiana and wouldn't have much left when you were done. So we'd actually have to put in a distillation plant to extract the oils from it here. But always like to see people trying new ideas. I thought, well, that was great. We're thinking of something different. Won't work here, but it's a nice idea to think about anyways.
Are they interchangeable as far as use?
I think so. I just grow the one kind.
Yeah, there's a lot of different. I mean, there's one called chocolate mint that has it actually tastes like peppermint patties. And,
Yum, I want it.
there's apple mint. That's another fairly common one around. There's actually a mint society where they grow. It's like orchid societies and all that. People get their favorite plants and things, and people swap them out. And the nice thing is, if you can just get a cutting or two for people and stick it in the ground, and it'll usually grow. Some easier than others, as I said. The peppermint's a little bit tougher to get rooted and grow for some reason than the spearmint, but it will grow.
It'll grow everywhere. One of the distilleries here in Kentucky has around their conference center, all their flower beds are nothing but mint. Really big. They bloom real pretty.
Yep.
Somebody's buying not mint to grow.
Really?
Not mint, don't grow. That's,
No? It takes so long to knock.
Too dry?
you think?
Because it likes the wet soil. I mean, not,
I don't know.
yeah, but if around the house where it's protected from the rain, it's too dry.
Put it out somewhere like around the light pole, electrical pole or something. Somewhere where you just don't pay any attention to it, and next thing you know, it'll be everywhere.
Yep. And it will spread.
I'm gonna say,
It will.
I was in Holland,
it's almost as bright as that green right there from the scissors.
Cheese?
Cheese, and I said, what did you guys use this? You know, what kind of color did you use? And they used strictly basil and basil cheese. So good. I have a question about plastic on beds, not a black plastic. Does that keep the soil drier or wetter, or how does that affect it?
Well, what it does is it actually helps hold the moisture in the soil, so they tend to be, well, it's one of those things. As long as the soil has good capillary action and it can draw in moisture from around it, it will actually draw water up into the bed. As the plant is transpiring, it draws water into the soil. And water goes from the wet areas to the dry areas, so as the water under the plant is transpired, the water comes into the bed and up. But it keeps any water from coming in terms of rain and things. So it can be drier right underneath the plastic. So it's one of those yes, no. What I always tell people, I love raised beds with plastic because they warm up quicker. But I always say if you're going to grow plants on raised beds, make sure that you have irrigation available underneath it. Because if it's a dry year, it's going to be even drier under that plastic.
We've got a lot of plastic on part of our garden now.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that's to our advantage or disadvantage with all this
It's your
rain.
advantage right now.
This year, if you got anything growing at all, you're doing it. But I like it if for nothing else other than it warms the bed up quicker, and it also helps you with your weed control.
And you said about male patterns, all this with the radio. I've heard women that have thinning hair use rosemary.
Okay.
I'll suggest that to my husband.
You got
Well, we've got some food over here if you'd like to come sample some things. There's not very many of us, we can have dinner.
I will grab an extra peppermint